just turned it on. It's starting to record. Yes, guys. So as I was telling you that what we will do is we will note down your targets for the next 1 month. It could be anything that you want to devote x plus 2 hours every day. X being the number that you are devoting on an average this month, or it could be to improve your mock score from x to y, where y is obviously a positive value, and anything like that, anything at all, or to ensure that you do not devote a lot of time to Diwali celebration, or ensure that you only devote time to Diwali celebration after you have completed X amount of work. So it could be anything, but let me know towards the end of the class through a private message or through anything, and we will then revisit it next month. So it's a great opportunity that I'm having this class towards the end of this month. With all of that, Gyan, is there anything any of you want to say before we begin the class?
Sir, I had a doubt.
Who is this? Can you please identify yourself?
Vaishnavi, sir.
Yeah, Vaishnavi, go ahead.
Sir, I came across this term called mirror order, principle of mirror order. Can you explain what it is?
I'm not very sure if I know it. I seem to have some recognition of it, but I cannot recall. I'll have to Google it myself. Sorry, Vaishnavi.
Okay, okay.
But I can do it. I can note it down and come with it in the next class. Will that work?
Yes, sir, sure. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Uh, is there anything else? Anything from my previous class? Uh, anything at all, guys? Okay. I see a lot of tired face today. I don't know why is that. Is am I asking too much from you guys by just asking what are you planning next month? I don't know. Are you guys so tired?
So we have class in the morning as well for 4 hours. We had a 4 hour session. So we had a 4 hour session.
Plus two. So like 4 hour plus 2 hours, 6 hours. People normally work for 12 hours these days, okay? Just working half of it. Here, no problem at all. I realize that 4 hours is not something that I used to, and hence it's always normal to feel tired when we are not used to a particular task and we just increase our boundary. That's lethargy at the very beginning. But okay, it's 4:10 now. The same drill. We'll have to read this passage, which is on your screen, in the next 2 or maybe 3 minutes, and then we will start the discussion and followed by a question answer session where you will have to give me the option in the private chat. At the same time, those of you who are done reading it will have to raise your hand so that I have an idea how many of you are reading it and how many of you are done reading it. So your time obviously started long back, 30 seconds ago. You got 2 minute 30 seconds more. So it's 4:10 now, 4:11, 4:14 is still the time you have.
Sir, can you share the document?
Okay, but I do not want to share the document because it has all the questions also. So that preempts a lot of discussion that we are going to have in the class. But I can share it towards the end of the class.
Okay, sir.
That works?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Yeah. Please go ahead. 4:14 is still the time you have.
Sir, did you share the documents?
Yes, I'll share it towards the end of the class.
Okay, sir.
all of you have turned off your video. Nice. Okay. Two of you have read it. It's 1 more minute, and please, all of you should have read it by now. Please do not forget to raise your hands once you are done reading it. Thank you, Nan. I seen your hand. Okay, guys. Time's over. I see a lot of you weren't able to finish it. Okay, let me check if people who were not able to read it are still in class. Please do not unraise your hand right now. Bhavna, are you in the class? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Ashik, you are also. Dhruv Kamlesh,
Yes, sir.
have you read it?
Last
Sure.
one.
Keep reading.
Yes.
Dinesh,
Yes, sir. Like I'm reading the last line.
okay. Keshav,
Yes, sir.
how much have you read it?
Almost done.
Okay. Nrupla,
Sir, I had texted you that I finished reading.
okay. So you should raise hand, please.
I raised my hand also, but then it went off.
Okay. Then Prasidh,
Could you please send the file again?
I'll send it towards the end of the class. Please remind me.
Okay, sir.
Prasidh, Siddhant, and Sumedha. Okay. Interesting. Okay, guys. So please unraise your hand now. Please lower your hand now. I just want to understand that how many of you had a feeling that okay, Siddhant, what can I do for you then? I'll from next time I can send the text in the chat box. Will it work?
Yes,
Can you read the messages in the chat box?
yes, sir.
Okay, I'll send the text of the passage in the chat box also.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, guys. But it's always better if you are using or getting classes on your desktop computer or laptops as against mobile phones. It's recommended that you have it from your system. In any which ways, I want to understand how many of you had some degree of recognition when you were reading it. I'm sure this is the basic of the contract law. We have all read it somewhere during the course of our preparation, especially in the older format. This is just a accumulation of several contract law principles. So how many of you recognize whatever you were reading, and hence it made the process of understanding it easier? Because I realized this is slightly tough from any normal text that you will encounter in your CLAT exam. This is slightly tough, but the fact that you have read it earlier may just make it a bit easier for you, relatively speaking, from the aspirants you are competing with. So how many have you had this feeling? Okay, Nishka. Okay, Nand, I have seen. Okay, great. Yes, Dhruv.
I could recognize the passage, sir.
Okay. So that will be the purpose of our exercise here and of our entire CLAT preparation, so as to say. Say, if you'll see what CLAT is an aptitude test, which means that CLAT is just measuring your aptitude. Aptitude is the ability to learn. So do you have the ability to learn law is something that CLAT measures as an objective of the test. Now, speaking honestly, CLAT is an exam which anyone can give even if it has not prepared for it. It's unlike the science stream examination or the CA exam where you need to have some degree of knowledge. But CLAT is completely unlike that. You know English, you know math, logical reasoning, all of this is pure for someone who is very, very intelligent, someone who is very, very well read. He can or she can solve CLAT exam very easily. So, what is the purpose of our preparation? The purpose of solving this exercise and for our preparation in general is to build a our speed, our efficiency in solving those questions, and B, to have a degree of recognition. We try to give questions that are likely to come in CLAT so that when the actual CLAT paper happens, you end up having some degree of resonance or you end up having some degree of recognition when you are solving those questions. So, how can you increase your possibility of recognizing something that is going to come in CLAT? By following the sources and by practicing as much as you can. And I keep on repeating, and you may find all of this very, very repetitive, but I just repeat it because it's too important. And it it may be so repetitive that it is borderline boring, but nonetheless it is very, very important that we keep on reading, we keep on solving questions, and the more we solve, the more we read, the better are the chances of the same question or the same sort of question falling in the CLAT and giving us an edge over every other aspirant. Because if you had seen this year's CLAT, it was a fairly lengthy paper. People did not have enough time to solve and to even read all the questions. So it's time that we increase that, and it's time that we start solving as many questions as we can. With that, let's go to the first question. The same drill, you will have to give it to me in the chat box privately. Okay, guys. So, first things first, who is an offerer and who is an offeree? An offerer is someone who makes an offer. An offeree is someone to whom an offer is made. So, how do we determine who is an offerer and who is an offeree? We do not start by looking at the first statement. because there are multiple first statements. So we look at the last statement, and last statement, the person who makes the last statement is always the offeree. So here A makes the first statement, B makes the second statement, and A makes the last statement, which makes A the offeree. An offeree is someone who is accepting the offer or to whom an offer is made. So we'll see that it is firstly A who is making an offer, then B is also making an offer in as much as he is specifying what is the price that he is going to charge. Okay, then A is accepting the same. So since A is the last person who had the last say in this matter, he becomes the offeree, and hence naturally B became the offerer. So B is the offerer and A is the offeree. So we are left with two options, B and D. What does D option D says? It says that since acceptance was not conveyed the first time, no agreement is constituted. It is incorrect because an acceptance cannot is need not be communicated in the first time. Every time an acceptance is not communicated, but the terms of the offers are varied, it becomes a counter offer. So A made an offer and B made a counter offer, which A later on accepted. So the reasoning of D is incorrect. Whereas what does B say? B says that A's acceptance of B's offer constitutes an agreement. As it is as simple as that. So the right answer is B. I see most of you have given B as the right answer. Let me go to Varshan. Varshan, why did you think A is the right answer?
Sir, I did not read the answers correctly, sir.
Okay. Have you understood now?
Yes, sir. Understood.
Yeah. Okay. Even Bhavna, even you felt A is the right answer. May I know why did you feel so?
Sir, in the first offer and the final offer. I thought it was for the first offer, so. But I understood it now.
Now you have understood?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Great, guys. That's about it. Most of you have given the right answer. Please start giving the right answer quickly from next time. Try to solve this question quicker. But yes, please do not compromise on the accuracy. So you take a longer time, but if it is possible, try to solve it faster. We are moving to the second question.
So can you scroll up
Is it better now?
to the previous question because it says refer to the facts above.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. May I go to Dhruv? Dhruv, why do you feel B is the right answer?
So because he had already made the offer, sir, and he sent a letter accepting his offer, sir. So I thought it was.
Okay. Okay. Nishka, what's your answer and why?
Sir, I wrote A. I mean, sorry, I answered B, but I'm not sure.
Okay. What is the other option you're confused with?
The other option I considered was D.
Okay. And what made you go with B?
I don't know. Like I said, I was confused. So.
Okay. But okay. Let me go to someone else. Nrupla,
Yes, sir.
why do you think B is the right answer?
Because in the facts, it already says that A agrees to buy the rice from B. So I thought it's a letter of acceptance, and I just marked it.
Okay. Okay, guys. One thing that you should understand that the facts, you have to refer to the facts, but facts are not exactly same. So A wishes to buy 10 kg of rice from B. Can you see the part that I have highlighted?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now, only this much has happened in this case. A hasn't agreed to buy rice from B because the question number 2 specifically states that A did not write back to B. So please do not assume that A has agreed to buy rice from B. Okay. So this is the fact situation that I have highlighted for you. You cannot extrapolate the entire fact situation of 1.1 to 1.2. Only the first two sentences of 1.1 are applicable to 1.2. Nrupla, does it change your reasoning or answer?
Yes, sir. But now, if we go by the facts of the second one, I would go for D.
Okay. Risha?
So even I thought the same. As in first sentence, they have said that A agreed to buy.
Okay. Now, is your answer different?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ananya Rao?
Yes, even I thought it was B, but then now I think, yeah, it's D.
Okay. Okay, guys. So the right answer is obviously D. You have to understand that every time an offer is made, the offer has to be unequivocally accepted. So if I am telling you that I want to buy a car and you tell me, okay, the car costs 2,000 rupees, you haven't accepted my offer. You have just said what the price of the car is, even if you have prefixed it with an okay. Once you have told me the price of the car, it's upon me whether I accept your offer or not. So every time an offer is made, for instance, the offer was made here where A told B that he wishes to buy 10 kgs of rice from B. B has to respond saying yes, buy it. If he instead says anything else, which has a slightly different meaning, it cannot be construed as a valid acceptance, and hence the contract will only be formed when there is offer and acceptance of the same thing in the same sense. Since it was absent in situation number 2, hence the right answer becomes D, that A did not respond to B's letter and hence never accepted the offer. Because if there was no offer, there was no contract at all. And because B is demanding money, he is not liable to get any money refunded. He just sent the rise on his own. Let's go to the third question and see what your answer is gonna be.
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yeah, please go on, Advait.
Sir, is The statement that A makes, he wants to buy 10 kg.
Advait, can you be a bit louder? Just a bit louder.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the statement that A makes that he wants to buy 10 kgs, is that an offer or is that just an invitation?
No, it's an offer.
But it doesn't have like a consideration and all, right? It's just saying that he wants.
Yes, it does not have a consideration amount, but still an offer.
Okay, so A statement is still an offer, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, guys, there must be some noise in the background. So election campaigning, there are by-election in Madhya Pradesh and election campaigning is going on. Today is the second last day of the election. So I just wish to understand if there is this sound is disturbing you, if it's coming.
We could hear some sound.
Sorry?
We are able to hear some sound coming back.
Okay, but is it disturbing my voice?
No, not at all.
No, sir.
Okay. I assume that it's gonna come closer to my home in the next 3-4 minutes. So we might have to call it off for 2-3 minutes till it passes. There is a huge vehicle with a lot of loudspeaker on it. So we'll just pause our class for a minute or two and wait for it to pass. But please go on. Give me the answer to the third question. Okay, Siddhant, you are asking which party is it? The roadshow is for the BJP. Okay, I've gotten various mixed options from all of you. So let's start by one with people who have given it first. At the same time, please, if possible, turn on your video while you are answering. Otherwise, it's okay. Nan, what's your answer? Why is your answer C?
So I was confused between C or D.
Okay.
Because
yes.
There was a line which said that there are exceptions for advertisements, but I feel once it's out for public display, then you're making it clear that you're setting the price, and if someone accepts it, you can't lowball them.
Okay. Okay. Aishwarya, what's your answer?
Sir, I think it's A.
Why is it so?
Because there was an invitation to offer made. I'm confused between A and D, actually.
Okay. So, do you think this is an invitation to offer the advertisement, or is it an offer?
It's an invitation to offer.
Okay. So, which is the offer? What is the offer?
That the rice is being sold for ₹20 per kg.
Okay. Let's go to Ananya. Ananya, what do you think?
I was confused between A and C, but then
okay.
Not sure why I inclined towards C though.
Sorry?
I'm not sure, but I just sent C. I'm not sure between A and C.
A and C?
Yeah.
What if I tell you that both of them are wrong?
Uh, then I'm not sure, sir. D maybe.
Okay. Is it too close now, the roadshow?
Yes, sir. It's quite
It's
loud.
all right.
No, it's quite
Sir,
loud.
it's okay, sir. It's manageable.
Is it disturbing you?
No, sir.
Only a bit. Sir. It's fine. You can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Let's finish this question. Uh, well, it's disturbing me. I can't focus. Just let's resume at 4:44. Let's take a 5-minute break from here. Or okay, if that's fine.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's do this. Okay, let's not take this longer break. Let's take a 3-minute break. In the meantime, I'll check if they have passed, or we will extend the break by 2 minutes. So it's 4:42. I'll be back at 4:42. Okay, guys. Sorry for the interruption. I hope all of you are here and have returned. Can I have a brief show of hands? How many of you are here? Brief show of hands. Yes. Few more people, please do it. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, guys. So something that we need to understand, there is a difference between an offer and an invitation to offer. And every advertisement is an offer. Sorry, is an invitation to offer. An offer is something that is specifically made to a particular person. And if it is made to the public at large, it has to be made in a very, very specific term. An offer to the public at large will be that if you do this, this will be something that we will do. So it's like that anyone who scales Mount Everest on 26th November will be given 100 rupees. This is a very public offer. But every other public communication is an advertisement. And why is it an advertisement? What is the reason that we consider this kind of things or offers made to public as advertisement? Can somebody tell me? Or why do we consider advertisement in general an invitation to offer and not an offer? There is a very solid
Because
reason.
it's put for the public, like it's for everybody and not one particular person.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So if you go like according to the passage, then it will be like the passage says that an offer should it should be made between only two people, but then here you're making it to like everyone, so it won't be valid.
Okay, but what is a much more commercial reason or much more logical reason behind this kind of a rule?
So like in advertisement, they just kind of push their own product. They're not actually like selling it to them. They're just like, it's a marketing strategy basically. That's it.
Basically like attracting customers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Consider this situation. When I'm making an offer, let's assume to the contrary. So you remember your 9th or 10th class maths problem where every time we have to prove some number to be rational, we used to assume it to be irrational or vice versa. And we used to solve P by Q where Q is not equal to 0. Do you remember this? Or is it too ancient for you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that used to be the first chapter in my 10th standard. But anyway, so consider this situation that had this been an offer where the shop is saying that rice is being sold rupees 20 a kg, or sorry, yes, 20 rupees a kg. What do you think can happen? How many people can accept this offer? Because it is being made to the public at large, any number of people can accept it, right? Because public constitute practically everybody. The entire humanity is public. Are you with me so far?
Yes, sir.
Right. So, and you also know that the rice in the shop is limited. It can be huge. It can be tons. But at the end of the day, it's gonna be limited. It's not gonna be 8 billion kgs, right? It cannot be 8 billion kgs or 80 billion kgs. But if we make it an offer and everybody accepts it, then the shopkeeper will be at a loss because he will be sued for breach of contract. Because if this is offer, any customer who gets up into the shop, gets into the shop and picks up a bag of rice is said to constitute an acceptance. But there is only n number of rice bags that he has. And since he cannot service the demand of the entire consumer community, it is deemed prudent that anything that the shop displays will be considered an invitation to offer. So that the shopkeeper knows how many offer can he really accept and how many consumer can he really service. Okay, so the fact that someone is advertising something is not a certainty that you will get it. He's just making you, or he's just inviting you to offer. That I am Parag willing to sell a Redmi Note phone at 9,999. Come and make me an offer. That's all an invitation to offer says. And why is it so? Because the number of or the quantity of a particular product is limited. And if a advertisement is considered as a public offer, any number of people can accept it. And if any number of people will accept it, it will cause or it will make the concerned shopkeeper a person who has breached the contract. Have you all understood the reasoning? Does anyone have any doubt?
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yeah, Harshit, go ahead, please.
Sir, will every invitation to offer have an initial point and a final point? Is there any invitation to offer which does not have an initial date and a final date?
Initial date and a final date? Yeah, certainly. I can just say that I am selling mobile phone at 10,000 rupees. I'll not provide when do I start selling and when do I stop selling. If that is what you meant, if I've understood your question correctly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so yeah, it's not necessary to have finite dates to your invitation to offer. Your invitation to offer can be vague. Your offer cannot be vague, but your invitation to offer can be.
Okay, sir, I got it.
Yes. So right now, this advertisement will only be an invitation to offer. And the fact that he rushed inside, loaded 10 kgs of rice in a bag is at best an offer and not an acceptance. So at the counter, his offer could have been accepted or it could have been rejected. In this particular case, he was refused, which means his offer to purchase 10 kgs of rice was rejected. So should A be given the rice? No, A should not be given the rice. And why should A not be given the rice? A should not be given the rice as no contract had been formed, or A should not be given the rice at the advertisement was not an offer but only an invitation to offer. D is a more appropriate choice. Although the reasoning behind or the rationale behind B is also correct, but D really hits the nail when it says that why is it not why has the contract not been formed? Because the advertisement was merely an invitation to offer, and hence D is the right answer. Okay, does anyone have any doubt here? Okay, moving on, 1.4. Siddhant, we have class till 6 p.m. Okay. Again, Nrupla, what's your answer?
So I marked B.
And okay, before you give me the answer, can you tell me what stream are you from? Are you from science or commerce or arts?
Commerce, sir.
Commerce. Okay. Okay. So, why do you think B is the right answer?
Because even in the passage, as it's mentioned, it's a law that a person cannot make a contract like with himself, like whatever he's controlling. With
Okay.
oneself, you cannot make a contract. And here it's given that the banking corporation is owned by A. So that's why I marked B, sir.
Okay. Okay. But if you read the principle at 1.4, it says the corporation are known as fictional persons, which means the steel corporation and the bank company, or the banking corporation and the corporation are both separate legal entities, are both separate fictional persons. So in effect, there is a contract being made between two people, two fictional persons. Okay, to understand it more clearly, tell me, Nupla, can a contract be made between two siblings, a brother and a sister?
Yes, sir.
Right? But obviously, his father or her father or their father do not own them. But at the same time, the company and the relationship of the owner of the company is very much like a guardian and a protectee, wherein he although owns the company, but the company has a separate legal existence. And that is commerce 101. That is the first thing that we learn in commerce, that a business entity has a
Yeah,
different legal
but
existence.
like
Yes.
so, and we have to go now by the principle or according to that passage. Like when we get a question like this,
We have to apply both. So the passage says that we cannot make a contact with oneself, which is true. Which is even if we apply here, we realize that there is no contact which is being made by oneself, because A is not making a contact at all. It is the corporation that A owns which is making the contract.
okay, sir.
Have I confused you, Nupla?
No, sir, not really. Like now I got it. We have to apply the principle as well.
Yes, yes. How we cannot completely ignore the principle if we have a passage like this. We will obviously always have to take into account principle, and principle to a particular question will always take precedence over the passage. Because sometimes there is an information in passage and a principle will
So we
say,
have to
okay,
like
go on, please.
concentrate more on the principle, is it?
Yes, yes. But we always have to keep both things in mind. Okay. So as we have discussed while solving Rupla's doubt, that there is a valid contract because there are two legal person involved. This company, both of this company, although owned by the same person, are two different persons. So consider A is the father of these two companies. So these two companies are sister subsidiaries or sister companies, and a contract between sister companies is always valid, because these are two different persons who are making the contract, and hence A is the right answer. Okay, question number 1.5. Please give me the answer. Okay, for a valid contract to come into existence, both the parties should agree with the same on the same thing in the same sense. So since A thought that he is contracting for the white color truck, B thought that he is contracting for the blue color truck, this is an invalid contract as the parties did not have the same thing in mind while they were contracting, and hence B is the right answer. Unless anyone has any doubt in this question, and if you do, please unmute yourself or raise your hand. Let's move on to the 1.6, the sixth question.
Sir,
Yes, Megha?
sir, does valid contract and enforceable contract mean the same thing?
Yes, every valid contract is an enforceable contract.
Okay.
They're replaceable and substitutable terms.
Okay, sir, got it. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Let's go to Harshit. Harshit, what's your answer? And can you please come online?
Sir, I'm sorry, but I have a signal problem, but I can tell you the answer.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I marked C as the answer, sir.
Okay, and why is it so?
Sir, because I think this is a valid contract, and so obviously it's an enforceable contract. And it's stated in the passage that enforceable contracts they enter into a legal binding contract.
Okay, Harshit. Yashwant, what's your answer and why is it so? And
I think the answer is B, but I don't know because there was no promise or there was no agreement given.
Okay.
So it cannot be valid.
Okay. Okay, nice. Prithvi, if you can come online, what's your answer?
Yes, sir. I went with option D because this is not a contract that can be enforced by law. So even it's not like a legally binding contract. So even if one person fails to fulfill his promise, it cannot be enforced by law. You cannot take that person. You cannot sue that person or take him to court or anything like that.
Okay, guys. So fun fact. How many of you have had a similar kind of promise from your parents that if you do or if you score such marks or if you do something, we will do something like that? Yashwant, Akash, for instance, my parents also promised me a lot of things. Okay, yes, few of you. I'm sure a lot of Indian parents do these things. So, like, this is straight out of their playbook. Okay, guys. And how often, please lower your hand and raise your hand if the answer is yes for this question. Has there been ever a case where your parents have not kept up with their commitment, where when they have promised you something, you did something and they never fulfilled their part of the promise. Akash, Megha, yes, nice. So at least 5, 6, 7, 8 people have parents like me. Okay. Oh, great. Can someone among you volunteer and tell me what it is?
Yeah, sir.
Anything?
So,
Akash, go ahead.
and in 10th standard, my father promised me to give me an iPhone if I cross 90%. I did cross, I got 91, but he was like, no, I won't give it to you because you have to clear CLAT.
Okay.
So he's just postponing that. He's like, I'll give it to you, I'll give it to you. That promise is still pending.
Okay. Advait, what about you?
Well, I think a PS3 or a PS4. I forgot. For one and
Okay.
two. Final exam.
And on what ground was the performance refused?
No, like I got the marks around. Like I think I don't know which grade it was, but it's like if you get some 90 something, you can get it. That's all.
Okay, and you were never given. Okay, Nishka, what about you?
Well, my mom said if I keep my room clean for 2 months straight, I'll get a MacBook, like a new MacBook, but I never got it. So I stopped keeping my room clean.
But did you keep your room clean for those 2 weeks?
I did.
Okay. That's a little subjective. Your mom can always argue if you were to hypothetically take her to the court that your room wasn't as clean as she expected it to be, which is always often the case with me. I feel my room is clean enough, but never enough for my parents. Here, have you ever heard of a case where children have taken their parents to court for unfulfilled promises? Ever heard about a case like this?
No.
No. None of us have heard. And believe me, I'm not joking, but almost every one of us, each one of us have been promised something, especially when we were crying that, okay, please stop crying, we'll do this, but in these many days, okay, we will get you something. So children always obviously have a habit of crying when they want something. And parents, obviously, in order to placate the children at that point, may also end up promising the same. That's a completely different thing to say that the parents were under undue pressure or undue influence when they were contracting with their children. But the fact of the matter remains that they have indeed promised. And most of the time, they never had the intention to really fulfill that promise. So, and this is not something that started happening with us or with you post 2000. This has been happening for really, really long. So when the Contract Act was formed in 1881, they also foresaw a situation like this because our great grandparents were also promised things which they were never given. I don't know what the promise looked like back in their times. In our times, it's mostly gadgets. But even in their time, there used to be promises by parents. And trust me, our parents have been the most consistent contract breachers in the history. But have we ever taken them to court? We have never taken them to court because the Contract Act specifies that for promises that are just social promise, making them when the offerer or the promisee does not, or the promisor does not have any intention of entering into a legally binding contract, and that is mostly in the context of a social relationship. When friends are promising something, when relatives are promising something, when parents are promising something, such agreements cannot be taken into the court. So these are unenforceable contracts. What does unenforceable contract means? That even if there is a contract, it has all the elements of a contract. It has an offer, it has an acceptance, it has an agreement, it has a consideration, it has everything. But it is unenforceable because social contracts are a specific variety of contract that if you take them to court, the court will just simply refuse to enforce it. Why? Because these are promises which are made in a social setting, and Contract Act is primarily to govern commercial transactions which have a commercial bearing. But social promises, they do not. The court is always wary of entering into familial arrangements. So when it is a matter of family, courts have often found themselves to be wary of getting into it. But then there are some serious kind of contract which are even formed within the family. For instance, the contract with respect to the division of the property between brothers. This becomes an enforceable contract. But most of the times, a promise to a young child by his parents is always gonna be an unenforceable contract. Okay. Does anyone have any doubt in this passage or in the last question?
In this,
Sir, what if a child has proof like video or written agreement?
No. It's not a matter of proof. It's just that this contract is invalid. This contract, is not invalid. It's unenforceable. So it's a specific variety of contract which is called a social contract. And social contract, it is presumed, are entered into a with no intention of entering into a legally binding relationship. That is just presumed. So this is how law stands. This is an exception to the general rule.
So what is the consideration in this?
Advait, please increase your volume.
So what is the consideration in this in 1.6?
Yes, the consideration for the parents is their son performing well.
So that 100 marks thing is a consideration.
Sure. Yeah, certainly. So what is consideration? When at the desire of the promisor, the promisee abstains from doing something or does something, did something, abstain from doing something, promises to do something, promises to abstain from doing something, it is called a consideration. So right now, the fact that his parents wants A to score 100 marks is a consideration for their parents. Okay, Advait, even if it is in the child's best interest, but it's a consideration for the parents nonetheless.
Yes.
And hence we will never call it an invalid contract. We will only call it an unenforceable contract. A contract is there, but it cannot be enforced.
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
So, what is the punishment for breach of contract?
Punishment for breach of contract depends on a lot of things. So the court first sees, can the contract still be performed? So if I go to the court and say that none is not giving me the 100 rupees that he promised, court will order you to give me 100 rupees back. But if I go to the court and tell the court that none did not deliver me the sweets on the occasion of Diwali that we contracted to, obviously now if you were to deliver the sweets, it will be of no use to me. So the court will ask you to pay me the money that I have lost because of maybe I was going to sell the sweets or maybe I was going to consume the sweets. So whatever the monetary value was there, it will be given. Plus, there is something called as liquidated damages. So if we have made a contract which says that if you breach the contract, you will be levied a penalty of 100 rupees. So that additional penalty will be given. Or if no such thing is agreed upon, the court may order any sum that it deems fit. That if you are not returning me 100 rupees, okay, pay 100 rupees as well as the amount that I have spent in coming to the court. So the punishment is always a monetary sum. How much is something that the court determines.
Got it, sir.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Unless there is any other doubt, let's go to passage 2, which is an offshoot of the first passage that we have read. You have got 3 minutes to read it. I'll decrease the size, but still quite long. Let me then. Okay, as promised, I'll also copy this and paste it in the chat box. Okay, it seems that I cannot paste this longer message. Okay, how many of you are having trouble reading it? Can I have a brief show of hands? Vaishnavi and Ananya, anybody else? This is your opportunity to tell me.
Me, sir, me.
Okay, Siddhant. Anyone
So
else?
what's your question again?
If you're having trouble reading it, please keep your hands raised. Okay, Yashwant, Vaishnavi, Ananya. Okay, cool. Okay. So I'm making some sort of an arrangement for all of you, people who have raised hands. But trying to. Well, guys, it seems I cannot send you the file over here in the chat box. There is no option for attachment. So I'll just paste it in bits and pieces. Okay, please refer to a chat box. I have pasted this passage there. Okay, I'll give you another 2 minutes to finish reading it. It's 5:17 now. Please read it by 5:19. I'm assuming, Vaishnavi, you have read the passage? Okay. It's time now, 30 more seconds, guys. Okay. Moving on to question 1. 2.1, please give me the answer in the chat box. Okay. Guys, unfortunately, none of you have given me the right answer. Very sad to see. Okay. So guys, who can enter into a contract? A person who is of the age of the majority. That is, if the person is 18 years of age. Okay. Now, Ram's age is 22 years. Although right now his mental age is only 12 years. Someone who can also not enter into a contract is a person of unsound mind. So these are the only two disqualification. Now, let us see whether Ram has any of this disqualification. What is the age of Ram? Is it below 18? No. We only have to consider his physical age and not the mental age. Okay. So his physical age is 22 and hence he will be considered to be a person of majority. Is he a person of unsound mind? No. His mental age is lower than his regular age. But the question does not tell us if he is of an unsound mind. So had his mental age been 6 years or 5 years, even then he was able to enter into a contract, because we are only concerned about two things: whether he is of an age of minority, no, and whether he is of unsound mind. That is again a no in this case, and hence A is the right answer. Most of you have gone with B and C. Yes, Nishka.
So what constitutes the idea of an unsound mind?
Yes, an unsound mind is someone who cannot understand the consequences of his action. Thanks for coming online,
Okay.
Nishka. Great.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, sir.
Gesture on your behalf. Yes, Advait, do you have a doubt?
Oh, no, sir. I actually forgot to lower my hat.
Okay. Dhruv, Kamlesh, you also tried to speak something. So, did you have a doubt?
I was about to ask the same question.
Okay. So, yes, Nishka. So, a person of unsound mind is generally a person who is lunatic or who cannot, in general, understand the consequences of his entering into a contract. But if you will see, there are 12-year-old people who also go to shops and buy things, right? So,
but there are also 12-year-olds who don't go to the shops.
Yes, but so if we were to argue on that line that not everyone enters, not every 46-year-old enter into a contract, that does not disentitle 46-year-olds from entering into a contract. All we are concerned here with is whether the person who is entering into a contract able to understand the consequence of his action. We will always presume it to be a yes unless we are given contrary information in the question. So because Ram is 22 years old and he has just his mental age to be 12 years, he can very well enter into a contract. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Okay. Question number 2.2. Okay, guys. So in this case, we have to understand whether the contract is valid or invalid. For that, we will have to take on the 3 disqualification that there are. Is Ria of a minority age? We have not given her age, so we will presume it is of she is of majority. Is Ria of unsound mind? We are not given this information, so we will presume that she is of sound mind. And the only thing that we need to consider here is, has she been prohibited by law or banned from or by law into entering into a normal contact with a normal passenger car? The answer is no. Who prevents her from entering? It is the F1 Racers Association of India. Is it the parliament? No. So it is only because of parliament made law can Ria be disentitled from entering into a contract. The worst thing that can happen to Ria in this case is her membership in the F1 Racers Association of India can be terminated. But whether she can enter into a contract with a taxi aggregator, yes, she can definitely enter into a contract. So the right answer is B. The contract is valid for Ria is not barred by law from entering into such contract. Does anyone have any doubt in this? Yes, Pratyush. Okay. Okay. Moving ahead, 2.3.
So, sir.
Yes, Dhruv.
Sir, but the association says that she should not be a part of any other contract. Like she should not drive.
So the association can say anything, but can the association make law?
No, sir.
No, only the parliament can make law. And if she is not following something that the association says, the association at best can terminate her membership. They can only lay down the condition of their membership. They cannot prohibit someone from doing something.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Yes. Okay, guys. 2.3. Okay. So the only thing that we are concerned here with is whether or not there is any degree of economic duress in the present case. So certainly there is economic duress because JPPL is threatening to delay repayments on other loan on time to get the bank to enter into this loan agreement. So there should be free consent from the bank if it wants to enter into a loan agreement. But what is JPPL doing? it is saying that if the bank does not enter into this agreement, we will delay the repayment which we already owe to the bank. Now, this is certainly a case of economic duress. Now, if there is economic duress, the contract becomes voidable. What is the difference between void and voidable? A void contract is something that none of the party can enforce. A voidable contract is a contract that is enforceable on the option of the party valid. But JPPL cannot force the bank to enter into this agreement. So whoever is duressed into entering into an agreement, it gives that party an option whether or not they want to consider the contract valid or invalid. If they want to enforce the contract, well, go ahead. If they do not want to enforce the contract, even that is somehow allowed. So that is what we think about, or what we understand from when we think about a voidable contract. Is the distinction between void and voidable contract clear to all of you?
Yes.
Okay. Is the distinction between void and voidable contract not clear to any of you?
Can you repeat it once again, sir?
Yes. Okay.
Not able to hear you properly.
Yes. Please stop me if you lose me anywhere midway. Okay, Yashwant. A void contract is a contract that cannot be enforced by any of the party. So Yashwant, for instance, if you are below 18-year-old and both of us enter into a contract, it will be a void contract. So even if you want to enforce it, you cannot enforce it. And even if I want to enforce it, I cannot enforce it. So in a void contract, none of the parties has an option of enforcing the contract. But if you and I enter into a contract and I place economic duress or any kind of duress upon you, and we enter into a contract based upon that duress, so only you will have an option of enforcing the contract. If you want to go ahead with the contract, you can go ahead. If you do not want to go ahead with the contract, you also have an option of not going ahead. But a similar option does not exist with me. So voidable contract gives the party who has been victimized an option. Does it make sense now, Yashwant?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So this contract will be voidable, and hence the right option will be option B. Going to question 4, 2.4. Okay. Akash, what's your answer and why?
I marked it as A. I thought the pressure was not illegitimate, it was legitimate because it's not against the law.
Okay. Okay. So do you remember reading in the passage that it said that even if lawful act is being done, but it is being done to pressurize someone into entering into a contract, that will result or render the contract voidable?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, do you still want to go with A?
No, B.
Okay. Okay. Ananya, what's your answer and why?
Sir, I sent A, but then now after you explained, yeah, I think it will be B.
Okay. Prithvi, what's your answer?
Sir, I went with option B.
Okay, why B and why not D?
Because the contract is voidable at the option of X here because it's specifically talking about coercion, and that's why I went with that option, sir.
Okay. But if you remember reading the passage, I agree with what you and Ananya she mentioned earlier, that B and D are correct option in as much as they mentioned that the contract is voidable for X. But why is it voidable? According to the passage, even if the threat is of an enforcement of a law, or of doing a lawful act, as I explained to Akash, it will render the contract voidable if it is done in order to pressurize someone into entering into a contract. So D is more attuned to the reasoning given in the passage. B and D are very, very close, but D is more or D clearly explains us the sentiment expressed in the passage. So when we are choosing the most appropriate answer, we will have to take that answer which talks about the same thing as the passage talks about. But I do realize it was a very, very close call in this. B, for all intent and purpose, is a correct answer, but D is a more appropriate choice, and hence D takes precedence over B, and D is the right answer. Now going to question 2.5.
So the answer is D, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Only Divya and Nishka gave me the right answer the earlier time in the previous question. Only both of them, everyone else got it wrong. Only received 2 answers. Okay, this seems like a pretty tough questions. Going with the number of answers I've received. Okay. So every time there is a relationship, there is a pre-existing relationship between the parties, we assume that there could be an undue influence. So only option A and C can be correct. There is no economic duress because the firm is not are asking Ayush to sign the contract, or they will do something. If they do something like this, it becomes duress. And if the firm says that we will hold this payment, we will do something which is tad bit and economical, it becomes economic duress, because such a thing is absent. It is either A or C. Now, if we go to the passage, it will tell us that in an employer-employee relationship, there is an irrebuttable presumption. Ayush is obviously an employee of the firm. So the firm and Ayush has an employer-employee relationship. And in cases of employer-employee relationship, as the law stands right now, there exists an irrebuttable presumption. And hence, C is the right answer. Kudos to Megha for getting it right in the first go. And Akash has also gotten it right, but 2 minutes later, but none of you got it right otherwise. Okay. Does anyone have any doubt in this passage or in the 5 questions that we have done?
Can you explain the last one? Like, I didn't understand what are rebuttable presumptions and irrebuttable presumptions.
Okay. What are rebuttable presumption and what are irrebuttable presumption? So every time there is an employee relationship, rebuttable. Okay, a rebuttable presumption means that the law will presume something, but it can be rebutted, which means the parties are at liberty to show that whatever the law is presuming is incorrect. And irrebuttable presumption, which is something where there is a presumption and we cannot give proof against it. So in an employer-employee relationship, we will assume that there will be some degree of undue influence which will always exist between an employer and employee. So no amount of evidence can rebut that presumption. But there are other relationships like a doctor-patient relationship where the doctor can show by evidence that there was no undue influence. So although it will be presumed that there was undue influence, it can be challenged in a court of law and evidence can be given against it. So that is a rebuttable presumption and an irrebuttable presumption.
Also, sir, in the passage, the last few lines, can you like go to the passage?
Yes, yes, I'm going to the passage. Okay, here, go.
This part. Yeah, the loan and rebuttable part.
Yeah.
Yeah, from like where the loan is secured, that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Tell me what's your question, or I'm unable to hear you properly.
I'm not able to understand what exactly that means. Like,
the rebuttable presumption and irrebuttable presumption.
No, this part, the loan part.
Okay, where a loan is secured by a person who is not in a commercial arrangement with the debtor, the lender is put on notice that undue influence may be presumed. Okay, so if in cases where the loan is being taken from a debtor for the first time, which means there will be no commercial agreement or an arrangement pre-existing between the loanee and the loaner, the lender who is giving the loan is put on notice that undue influence may be presumed. So he is already told that if a case goes to the court will presume that there is undue influence that you exercise. So that is something that the lender is always notified of.
But I don't understand, like, the first time someone is taking a loan, the lender will be informed that there can be, that it's presumed that there's undue influence.
Correct, exactly.
But that logically doesn't make sense, right? Because it's the first time. So why will there be undue influence?
No, because the fact that the bank, that person has taken loan means that the person needed money. Okay, so the person needed money and the person, that lender is giving him the money. So it obviously puts the lender at a dominant position, right? They can say anything to, okay, that will have to pay me X amount of interest or Y amount of interest if you want the money. So most of the time people want loan out of desperation, and therefore undue influence is always presumed.
Then how does it change when you're not taking a loan for the first time?
Because if there is already a commercial arrangement, it was in the first time presumed that there was some degree of undue influence, but in the second time you are again taking the loan from the same person. So it changes the dynamic because you are now more comfortable with that person. You have had a larger time frame in which you have dealt with the person. You're not coming for the first time to this person, which also means that you have learned something out of it. So if there was undue influence at the first time, you might not have come for the second time. But since you are coming for the second time, it tells us that undue influence may not be there.
Yes, and the next part, like, what is the contract of security?
Okay, the contract of security will in such a situation may be set aside if there has been undue influence or misrepresentation by the data. So you know that every time a loan is taken, something has to be kept with the bank as security.
Yes.
The papers of the land, the papers of property, the car or anything, something has to be, right? Something has to be kept with the bank. So if the judge finds that the contract of security was formed based upon an undue influence, so the bank can, if the requirement is to keep let's say 100 square feet of property, the bank may just keep the paper for 200 square feet of property. If the requirement was just to keep one piece of land or one particular piece of land as mortgage, the bank may just influence the lender to keep more amount of that security as more amount of that land as security. So in such a situation, undue influence will be presumed.
Got it. Good. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So is there any other doubt? Okay, guys. Yes, Divya.
Sir, I have a doubt, but it's not related to the passage.
Yes, go ahead.
Is there a difference between a breach of a contract and frustration of a contract?
Yes. Breach of a contract is when a party who was obliged or obligated to perform a part of the contract do not perform that part of the contract. Frustration of a contract is when the contract becomes impossible to perform, or the party who was supposed to perform it does something that makes the performance of the contract negative. For instance, the breach of contract is if I give you 100 rupees and you do not give me 100 rupees back. It is breach of contract, right? But if I give you or you give me payment to paint your house, okay, and something happens and your house is or there is an earthquake and your house is destroyed, now the contract is frustrated, which means the contract cannot be performed now.
Yes, sir, got it. Thank you.
Yes. Does anyone have any other doubt? I realize it's 5:50 now, so we do not have sufficient time to go on to the next passage. So I am happy to take your doubts related to passage, related to the passages earlier, or anything in general, and that's how we can spend the next 10 minutes.
So in case of this frustration of contract, there's no amount of punishment as such. Like nothing happens to the person who's unable to do it.
Yes. So we will have to see if the frustration is the result of a person fault. So in this case, in Divya's case, where I was obligated to paint her house, was I at fault when the earthquake happened?
No, not your fault.
Not my fault, right? But consider this: she gives me her car for painting, or cars for color. She wants me to color the car from black to red, and I, instead of coloring the car, park it at some place which results into some kind of destruction of the car, where I cannot, obviously, because the car no longer exists, the car is completely destroyed, I cannot paint it. But and this contract has frustrated, but was it my fault in this case?
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
So here I will be made liable. So we will have to see and go more deeper into the fact and realize which party is at fault and if there is a fault of any party.
Got it.
Just, I have a doubt.
Yes, Akash.
According to Hindu Marriage Act, polygamy is banned, right? No, polygamy or bigamy is banned.
Yes.
If a Hindu marries a Hindu girl, if a Hindu boy marries a Hindu girl, and after the Hindu boy converts into a Muslim, and again and then marries a other girl, will that person be liable for bigamy or under the Hindu Marriage Act or not?
No, he will not be liable for bigamy. So if you know famous actor Dharmender, Sunny Deol and Bobby Deol's father, he has married twice. Once he is married with the mother of Sunny Deol and Bobby Deol, and then he converted into Islam and married Hema Malini.
Yeah,
so
because I was coming across this question, but then they had told that he is liable under the for the first marriage and under the Hindu Marriage Act.
Yes, so even if you did your first marriage under the Hindu Marriage Act, but then subsequently you convert into Muslim, and if you subsequently convert into Islam, then your second marriage will be valid. You cannot be prosecuted for bigamy because now
so will the first marriage be valid or not?
Yes, it will be it will be valid.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
But then I came across the same kind of question, and in the answer it was said that because he changed for the sole purpose of like marrying, it's not valid or something like that was the answer.
Then I'll have to see the principle in the question. I'm not sure that I have never seen such a question. So I'll have to see whether the question is wrong or we are missing some information that vitally changes the question.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Prithvi is asking if I can explain the difference between a wagering contract and a contingent contract. Okay. Before I explain, can one among you explain it? And that's a very great doubt. Yeah, Advait, you go ahead.
No, between what and what? Contingent and?
Wagering contract and contingent contract.
Wagering is not valid, right?
Yes. But what is the difference? How do you differentiate a contingent contract and a wagering contract?
Okay. Wagering contract is some contract which is like which happens on an event basically. Whether if that event happens or not, you will be liable to play or not. So that's a wagering contract which is invalid contract basically. And
okay. So the difference between wagering contract and contingent contract is better understood by an example. So if I wager, Prithvi, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Yes. You can keep yourself unmuted so that I can get affirmation if I've not lost you. So, okay. So let's take an example of a wagering contract. A wagering contract is where I tell you that if this happens, I'll pay you this amount. And if this does not happen, you will have to pay me the same amount. So it's like a bet. If Delhi wins, I'll pay you rupees 100. If Bangalore wins, you will have to pay me 100 rupees. So it's more in the nature of bet, where there are simultaneous obligations and opposite obligations. The happening or non-happening of an event results into different kind of performance. So if A happens, payment is made from person A to person B. If A does not happen, payment is made from person B to person A. So that is a wagering contract. What is a contingent contract? A contingent contract is a contract where something happens after some event has happened. So if I tell you that if it rains today, I'll pay you rupees 100. Okay, this is a contingent contract. When does it become a wagering contract? It becomes a wagering contract when I tell you that if it rains today, I pay you rupees 100. But if it does not rain today, you will have to pay me 100. So when there are opposite obligations, it is a wagering contract. But
so it's something like a reciprocal basis thing?
Yes. When there are reciprocal promises of the same nature. Okay?
Yes, sir. Got it. Thank you.
Yes, and every contingent contract, every wagering contract is therefore a contingent contract. Okay, but only when we add the element of reciprocity in a contingent contract, we end up having a wagering contract. Yes, Harshit. Okay.
Sorry, sir. It was by me.
No problem. No problem.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
guys. I see none of you have still sent me your new month resolution, and I feel you haven't had time to think about it. Please think about it. Get back to me. Get in touch with me. I have sent you my email address. I'll send it to you again. If you have any problem, any doubt, please feel free to reach me. I'll try to reply you. I am sometimes a bit busy, so I may take some time, but most of the time I try replying to people. Uh, and the worksheet, yes, let me send it to you.
Sir, I have a difficulty in solving problems which related to Islam law, like hibba, mahar, and all stuff.
Okay.
Because it's really very confusing.
Okay, you can send me the sheet you are having trouble with, so that I have a better sense of what you exactly you are having trouble in.
I got it.
Okay, so I have sent all of you the file. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, please download it. And thank you. Thanks for being here. I am going away from the session. I'll end the meeting in a couple of minutes so that you have enough time, sufficient time to download the sheet. Please get back to me if you have any doubt. I'll be happy to assist you with
Did you
it.
share the link, sir, of this document?
Sorry, which link?
Of this worksheet?
Yeah, I've sent it in the chat.
The contingent contract is valid, right?
Yeah, contingent contracts are valid.
Okay, wagering is invalid. Like by
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yes, Akash.
Wrongful restraint comes under the ambit of wrongful confinement, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So any person who is liable for wrongful confinement is also liable for wrongful restraint.
Yes. Okay, guys. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sir, I haven't got the link. Can you send it again if you don't mind?
Thank you, sir.